You send a chaîne you wet, and in that waiting, something shifts. The silence between sent and seen becomes a space where your mind builds entire narratives, most of them darker than reality. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but your thumb keeps returning to the screen, checking for that reply that refuses to come. If any part of this feels familiar to you, you're not alone. And if you ever feel like sharing your experience, the comments are open. This is the waiting mind, a place where patience dies quietly and anxiety speaks louder than reason. You reread the message you sent, looking for anything that might have sounded wrong. The first thing you do is go back. You scroll up to your own words, reading them as if they were written by a stranger. Suddenly, that casual tone feels too casual, that joke feels too sharp, that question feels too needy. The message hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. You search for the flaw, the word that might have landed wrong, the emoji that could have been misread. You analyze punctuation like it holds hidden meaning because in your mind, right now, it does. Every period becomes a wall, every ellipsis becomes doubt, and the strange part, the message was fine. You knew it was fine when you sent it. But waiting has a way of rewriting certainty into suspicion. The silence doesn't just delay a response, it rewrites the entire conversation in your head. Every minute of silence seems to confirm that you said something inappropriate. Time moves differently when you're waiting. 5 minutes feel like an hour. 10 minutes feel like evidence. The silence isn't just absence, it becomes a message of its own. And the message it sends is always the same. You crossed a line somewhere. You start creating explanations. Maybe they're upset. Maybe they're rethinking the friendship. Maybe that thing you said 3 days ago is finally catching up to you now. The mind doesn't wait for facts when anxiety is writing the script. It fills the void with the worst possible interpretation. And here's the cruelest part. The longer the silence lasts, the more convinced you become, not because anything changed, but because your brain treats waiting as confirmation. Silence becomes proof, absence becomes verdict, and you, alone with your thoughts, become both judge and defendant. You create alternate versions of the conversation that never happened. Your mind doesn't stay still while waiting. It starts rewriting. You imagine what you should have said instead. A softer version, a version that wouldn't have caused this silence. You rehearse conversations that will never happen, trying to fix a problem that might not even exist. You play out their response before it arrives. Sometimes they're cold. Sometimes they're confused. Sometimes they don't respond at all, and you're left imagining how you'd handle that rejection. These phantom conversations feel so real that when the actual reply comes, it almost feels like a disruption. The waiting mind is a storyteller, and when reality doesn't give it material, it creates its own. You live through multiple timelines of the same moment, most of them worse than what will actually happen. But in the silence, those imagined versions feel more real than anything else. A person's online status becomes more important than the answer itself. You see the green dot. They're there, they're active, and suddenly the silence has a face. It's no longer just waiting, it's being ignored in real time. You watch that little indicator like it holds answers. They're typing to someone, scrolling through something, just not responding to you. The worst part isn't the silence anymore. It's the presence within the silence. If they were offline, you could tell yourself they're busy. They haven't seen it yet. But that green removes every excuse. It turns waiting into a choice they're making. A choice that doesn't include you, and so you monitor it. You refresh. You check if they've moved from online to active now to nothing at all. The status becomes more important than the message itself because it tells you what the silence won't, that you're not a priority right now, and that realization stings more than any delayed reply ever could. You interpret the delay as disinterest, even knowing it might just be because they're busy. You know they could be busy. You know people have lives outside their phones. You know there are a dozen reasonable explanations for why they haven't replied yet. But knowing doesn't stop the feeling. The rational part of your brain argues with the anxious part, and the anxious part always wins. Because waiting doesn't care about logic, it cares about patterns. And the pattern your mind sees is simple. Silence equals distance. Delay equals disinterest. Even when you've been on the other side of this, distracted, overwhelmed, meaning to reply, but forgetting you can't extend that same understanding to someone else when you're the one waiting. So you exist in two truths at once. The logical one that says they're probably just busy, and the emotional one that whispers, or maybe they just don't care enough to respond. And no matter how hard you try to believe the first, the second one sits heavier in your chest. Anxiety grows precisely because you know you're being irrational. The hardest part isn't the anxiety itself. It's knowing you shouldn't feel this way and feeling it anyway. You're aware it's irrational. You can see yourself spiraling. You recognize overthinking for what it is, but awareness doesn't stop it. If anything, it makes it worse, because now you're anxious about being anxious. You're judging yourself for caring too much about a reply that might come in 5 minutes. You tell yourself to relax, to stop checking, to let it go, and then you check again 30 seconds later. The rational voice in your head becomes another critic, pointing out how ridiculous you're being, and so the anxiety doubles. Once from the waiting, once from the shame of waiting. You're trapped between what you feel and what you think you should feel. And in that gap, the mind grows louder, because nothing feeds anxiety quite like the awareness that you're supposed to be above it. You monitor patterns. She usually responds in 5 minutes. You've kept track without meaning to. You know their rhythm, how long it usually takes, what time of day they're most responsive, whether they're the type to reply immediately or let messages sit for hours. You've built an internal database of their texting behavior, and now any deviation from that pattern feels significant. When someone who usually responds in minutes takes an hour, your mind doesn't see randomness. It sees meaning, a shift, a change in how they feel about you. You compare this silence to previous silences, measuring the weight of each one, as if response time could be translated into care, as if delay could be measured in emotional distance. And the cruel irony, they probably don't even know they have a pattern. They're not thinking about their average response time or what message it sends when they break it. Butoir, because the waiting mind doesn't just watch the clock, it watches for what the clock might be trying to say. The waiting makes you question the entire relationship, not just that message. What starts as waiting for one reply becomes something bigger. You begin questioning everything. How solid is this friendship? Really? Do they value you the way you value them? Have you been reading this whole relationship wrong from the start? A single, unanswered message becomes a lens through which you examine every interaction you've ever had. You scroll back through old conversations, looking for signs. Were they always this slow to respond? Have you always been the one initiating? You search for proof that this silence is part of a larger pattern, evidence that you've been more invested than they ever were. The mind builds a case against them, against yourself, against the entire connection. And somewhere in the back of your awareness, you know you're catastrophizing. That one delayed response doesn't erase months or years of history. But anxiety doesn't care about history. It only cares about the present absence. And in that absence, every doubt you've ever buried finds its way back to the surface. When the answer finally arrives, the relief is mixed with shame for having worried so much. The notification arrives. Your chest loosens. The response is normal, casual, friendly, nothing wrong at all. They were just busy. They didn't see it right away. It was exactly as simple as the rational part of your brain kept insisting. And now you're left holding all that anxiety with nowhere to put it. because the relief doesn't come clean. It comes wrapped in embarrassment. You realize how much energy you spent on something that turned out to be nothing, how many phantom conversations you created, how deeply you spiraled over a delay that meant absolutely nothing to them. The gap between what you felt and what was real suddenly becomes painfully visible, and you can't even explain it. You can't tell them you spent the last hour dissecting their silence, rereading your message, questioning the entire friendship. So you just reply back, something light, something that hides the fact that for a while there, their absence rewrote your entire sense of connection. The storm passes, but the shame of having weathered it lingers a little longer. You promise not to check your phone again, but you look at it again in less than a minute. You make a deal with yourself. You're done checking. You'll put the phone down, focus on something else, let the reply come when it comes. You mean it, too, for about 40 seconds. Then your hand reaches for the screen again, almost on its own. No new notifications, just the same silence, and the cycle begins again. It's not even conscious anymore. Your fingers know the motion and lock. Swipe, check. You do it while watching something, while working, while having another conversation. The phone becomes an extension of your anxiety, a physical place where the waiting lives. And every time you check, you tell yourself it's the last time. It never is, because the waiting mind doesn't respect promises. It doesn't care about discipline or self-control. It just wants resolution. And until that resolution comes, you'll keep checking, keep hoping, keep breaking the same promise to yourself over and over. Not because you're weak, but because silence, when you're on the other end of it, is one of the hardest things to sit with. The waiting mind isn't a flaw. It's just what happens when connection lives inside screens, and silence can mean 1,000 different things. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're human. And somewhere, right now, someone else is rereading a message they sent to you, wondering why you haven't replied yet. The anxiety fades when the response arrives, but the pattern remains, because as long as we communicate through delays and digital distance, we'll keep filling the silence with meaning it doesn't always hold. The trick isn't to stop caring, it's to recognize the waiting for what it is, a moment, not a message. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from. And if you've ever been on either side of this silence, the comments are open. Sometimes it helps to know you're not the only one waiting.